We ready, Josh?
We're rolling.
Everybody, thank you for your attention today. I guess you guys have already seen one or two of these presentations.
They've seen mine, but then I also got an overview.
Oh, okay.
A presentation that was an overview of it.
Okay, so I'll introduce myself. My name is Nick Meyerson. I'm also a graduate student at the University of Texas. And so, as some of you may have learned last time, graduate students are basically scientists in training. Both Josh and I are looking towards our PhD degrees, and we're about 3 years along it. And I'm going to describe to you my particular project, which is quite different from what Josh talked about and what our friend Peter will talk about next month. But what I work on and think about quite a lot is something called virus fossils. And so before I jump into describing what that is, because it is kind of a weird idea, let me just ask if any of you guys think you've ever been infected with a virus before. Okay, most of you. So chances are probably all of you guys have been infected with some virus, and most often it may be like a cold virus that keeps you home from school. Sometimes it could be like an influenza virus, which is what this is a picture of here, kind of these globular little structures that roam around in your mucus whenever you're sick and that spread whenever you sneeze. And so viruses are literally everywhere around us, and they don't only infect humans, but they may infect your dog or your cat, or even mice and rats and all sorts of animals. And so they are very tricky creatures, and they happen to get pretty much everywhere that they can. And so in my lab, we like to think about ways that we can fight viruses and hope to, in doing so, increase human health and hope that less people get infected with viruses in the future. So I'll describe how we do that during this presentation. But before I start talking about virus fossils, I just want to give a brief overview of fossils in general. And so most of you guys probably know that most of the fossils we have are very large things that we can see with our eyes and that we dig up from the ground. And so this is kind of a cartoon of what we call the fossil record. And for those of you that have never seen the fossil record, basically what it told us was a number of things. On the top here, you can see some fossils of maybe some organisms that you're more familiar with, like a human. But as you move down in the fossil record, or essentially as you dig deeper into the earth, you get to organisms that are relatively more old. Like some guys here, these are called stromatolites, and they're literally billions of years old. So the fossil record, as it began to be uncovered and put together, it taught us a lot about the history of Earth and how old organisms are and how they've changed over time. And so by thinking about fossils, you can kind of reconstruct events in the past, and these past events help us understand what might happen in the future. And so this is why fossils are important in general. And I'm going to show you guys just a few highlights from the fossil record. And so this is one of the oldest known fossils, and it looks like just a bunch of rocks, and really it is. But inside the rocks are these small little bacteria that were found. And by carbon dating, which is a way to kind of tell how old something is, they were able to determine that it's this many years old. Does anybody know what number that is?
3 billion.
I think I heard it. So it's 3.5 billion years ago. And so a billion is a giant number. It's almost impossible for a human to conceive what that is. We like to say, oh, well, there's a bunch of zeros after it, so it's a giant number. And pretty much that's an accurate statement. Here's another cool fossil. And this happens to be Tyrannosaurus rex. This is my favorite dinosaur. And T-Rex lived approximately 65 million years ago. And so we're now thinking about millions of years as opposed to billions. Still a very big number. But you can see that in a relative time, we went from little bacteria that you can't see with your eyes to these enormous organisms that obviously ruled the earth because you can see their sharp teeth. They were probably very dangerous. And so this tells us that over time, organisms can evolve and that they change, sometimes drastically in the case of T-Rex. Unfortunately, he's no longer with us, so it might tell us that size isn't necessarily always the most important aspect of life on Earth. This is a skull from something that looks pretty close like a human, but actually it's one of our older ancestors called Homo habilis, which lived approximately 2 million years ago. And so I've kind of shown you just a short span of life on Earth, going from bacteria to dinosaurs, and now here we are, finally, to our most familiar organism, our cells, the Homo sapiens, which approximately arose 500,000 years ago. And so between 500,000 years ago and now, humans have essentially ruled the Earth, we like to think. And so that's just the short history of the fossil record and some of the important things that we've learned by studying fossils. Okay, but I didn't come here to talk about just the fossil record, but really we wanted to talk about viruses. So here's my little cartoon of an angry virus that may infect you at some point. But the question is, how do we get a virus fossil? Or how come we've never seen virus fossils? And so the answer, there's two answers to that. The first is because these guys are incredibly small. They are so small that you can't see them, not even with a regular light microscope, which you can see human cells with, but you can't see viruses. So they are incredibly small. And so this little series of pictures is going to illustrate how small a virus actually is. And so you can kind of keep track of how zoomed in we are by keeping track of these numbers. So this is like 1x magnification. This is kind of what a human hand would look like by eye. And this person happens to be holding a pen. And so we're going to start zooming in on the pinhead. And on top of the pinhead, there's going to be some bacteria, some viruses. So you'll be able to see kind of the relative sizes of these different things. Okay, so we're going to zoom in 10 times. And now what you can see on the tip of the pin is a piece of hair. So this is like a human hair lying on top. And you can kind of start seeing some little organisms on the top of the pinhead. So we'll continue to zoom in. Now we're at 100x. And so we're now on like the surface of the pin. And what you see, this is kind of like a tick or like a bed bug, as some of you might refer to it. And then here is our little group of some bacteria and also viruses. So we're going to continue to zoom in. Now we're at 1,000 times. And now you can see a few more things. Now we're on like a cellular level. And what these kind of larger spheres represent are human cells. And so here's like a blood cell. Some of you might see these. They're like donut shaped. And these are like white blood cells, part of your immune system. If we zoom in more, in between these human cells are now bacteria cells. And some of you may know bacteria are much smaller than human cells. And so this is kind of the relative size. And if we zoom in even more, we can start seeing viruses now. So this is it's called a filamentous virus. This is representative of a virus called Ebola. Has anyone heard of Ebola before?
Yeah.
So Ebola is a very dangerous virus, and it's currently emerging in Africa. It kind of shows up and devastates a village and then leaves back into the forest where we don't really understand where it goes or why it reemerges, but it's incredibly dangerous. Yes?
Well, don't monkeys carry the disease?
It's thought that monkeys carry the disease, and actually that's a very good point, because primates, just like humans, get infected with lots of viruses, and lots of viruses that emerge in humans, like HIV, for example, or Ebola that I mentioned, seem to come from our primate relatives, like the chimpanzee, or the gorilla, or the rhesus monkey. And the reason is because the cellular environment inside of us is very similar to a monkey. That may seem funny to think about, but we're not really so different from our primate relatives. So a virus that can exist in a monkey can very easily jump into humans and start infiltrating our population. So yes, monkeys we think Ebola might come from, but also bats, it could also be coming from that as well. Okay, so there's some smaller viruses here that if we zoom in, we can see them. And so from the hand that we saw before that was holding the pinhead, we're now 1,000,000 times zoomed in. And so again, viruses are extremely small, so we cannot see them with our eye, which makes finding their fossils even more difficult. So that's one problem with viruses, they're very small. And here's some pictures of viruses. Now again, because we can't see them, this isn't like taking a camera and taking a picture of a virus, but through very complicated and sophisticated microscopy techniques, we're able to kind of reconstruct what some viruses will look like. And so I put on here some of the more famous viruses, like influenza. Here's the more recent swine flu that everyone was so scared about. Here's the weird-looking Ebola virus that's real filamentous. Rhinovirus is the name of the common cold that people get. And so when you have a cold and you get to stay home from school, you probably have a guy that looks like this running around in your bloodstream. Another famous virus is HIV that has recently emerged and is now a pandemic throughout the entire world and is really a big global health threat. This virus I included just because I like the name. It's called cytomegalovirus. Megalo because it's very large in terms of viruses. If you put this virus next to HIV, it would look like a giant virus, even though we still couldn't see it by eye. And this guy, I like it because it looks so cool. This looks like kind of some sort of alien virus or something, or like a spider, yeah. And really, people were absolutely astonished when they saw that this was the structure of a virus. But this virus actually is called bacteriophage, and it's named that because it infects bacteria. So it doesn't infect humans, but it infects those smaller bacteria species. And these guys are, bacteriophage are thought to be one of the most numerous organisms on Earth. I think if you took a drop of water out of the ocean, there'd be something like several billions, if not trillions, of bacteriophage in that single droplet of water. So it may very well be the case that they are the most prominent organism on Earth, which is another reason you might want to be interested in viruses, if they kind of are the most populated species. Okay, and so another problem with viruses that don't allow us to see their fossils is that they're very fragile. And so if you consider normal fossils, like the T-Rex that I showed you, those fossils are bones, and bones are incredibly strong structures that are able to stand the test of time, meaning they can be in the ground for millions of years, and you can still dig them up, and they're pretty much exactly how they were before. Unfortunately, viruses are completely different. They can typically live and stay assembled out in the air for a day, maybe 2 days before they kind of fall apart, and we'll never see them. And so viruses are hard to capture and hold on to for a long time because they're small, and also because they're very incredibly fragile. So how do we get virus fossils? So I'm going to transition to now talk about more research that I'm more closely associated with, and some things that I've thought about quite a bit over the past few years. And so people that work in the field of viruses, which is called virology, they would love to know the history of viruses on this planet, because as you know, being human, we've been on this planet for quite a long time, millions of years. And so how have we been able to fight off viruses? How do we survive, even though there's all these viruses that infect us, and we're constantly having to deal with this onslaught of viruses? And so a virologist would love to know how that happened. How is it that over time we've been able to fend off all of these virus infections? So one way to study that would be to get virus fossils and understand how they've changed over time, and how we have also changed over time in order to fight them. So because we can't see them, and because they decay very quickly, we have to think of a different trick to find these viruses. And so the analogy I like to use is footprints. And so when you see footprints like this on a beach or in the snow, there's a lot of things you can learn, even though the organism itself is not there anymore. And so imagine if you look at these footprints, you would kind of conclude, okay, there's a human here, and you can maybe measure like the distance between the footsteps and figure out maybe how tall the person was. And so even though that person's gone, if we look at some marks that they left, we can maybe start making some assumptions about who they were and what they did. Similarly here, we could see, okay, maybe a dog was here at one point, maybe some kind of bird. And in this case, honestly, I don't know what footprints those are, what animal. If anyone has any guesses. Possibly a duck. I'm not really sure, to be honest. But in any case, the footprints in this way allow us to make inferences about something that's not there anymore. And so we can use this trick with viruses, because viruses don't stick around. But the question is, do they leave footprints anywhere? Is there anywhere we can look that they were there and what effect they had? So the answer is yes, and now I'm going to describe to you where these virus footprints or virus fossils actually are. Okay, so here I have a diagram of, here's like an outline of a person, and what I've zoomed in on is a single cell inside of a human being. And so a cell, as some of you may know, is divided up into two parts. You have this part that's in pink is referred to as the cytoplasm. So it's kind of like where a lot of different things are going on in the cell and lots of signals are being processed. But inside of the cytoplasm is an area called the nucleus. And as you all know, the nucleus is where things like your DNA are stored, which is that information that helps you live. And so your DNA is protected inside of the nucleus, and then outside here is the cytoplasm. So this is just a very simple diagram of a cell. Another important thing is that in your body, there's more than, well, that's a lot of zeros. That's more than 1 billion, but there's actually 1 trillion cells in your body. And so each one of you is made up of a whole lot of cells, more cells than the age of the oldest organism on Earth. So that's quite a lot. Again, it's a number that's kind of incomprehensible, and so if you tried to stack 1 trillion quarters up, it would probably go all the way to the sun. So it's a very large number. Okay, and so I'm going to use this diagram to kind of show how viruses leave a mark actually in you. And so the virus fossils are inside of all of us, and I'll describe how that actually happens. Okay, so I've got this little virus that pops up, and I don't know, I think maybe this is a cold virus. So the virus will kind of collide with your cell, and when it does this, it enters your cell, and it moves into the nucleus. And the nucleus is where a cell replicates, or sorry, the nucleus is where a virus replicates.
It starts like messing with you?
Yeah, I mean, essentially a virus, when it comes in, it invades your cell. So your cell normally has a lot of jobs that it needs to do. When you're hungry, it sends out messages to tell you that you're hungry. Or when you eat, it has to take in the food and make energy out of it. When a virus invades, just like you said, it comes in and it messes everything up. It takes over the cell and it basically tells it, all right, now you're only going to make virus. You're only going to make me. You're not going to worry about all the other stuff you're supposed to do. And so when that happens, more viruses start to pop up. Here they are all replicating inside. And sometimes, after an infection like this is called like a primary or productive infection, there's so much virus around that when it leaves and goes on to another cell, it leaves inside your nucleus a piece of itself in the form of its own DNA. And so this little piece of the virus actually gets integrated with your own DNA. And so you can imagine if another virus pops up, in this case a flu virus, and this is all happening within a single person's lifetime. So keep in mind that during your life, you're constantly accumulating viruses. And in doing so, they're constantly leaving behind a little piece of themselves in your nucleus. And so you can imagine this happening over and over again with many viruses. In this example, I've only illustrated like 4 virus infections. But each virus can mark inside of your DNA. Okay, so that's pretty cool, but then how does this information get passed along? How is it, the whole point of a fossil is for it to be preserved over millions of years. And so you can imagine this person that got infected and now has all these little virus fossils inside of it. Well, okay, so that cell is part of the body. When this person has children, which is illustrated here by these 3 people that pop up, well, keep in mind, your DNA gets passed on to your kids. That's exactly how genetic information gets inherited. Like if your father is tall, you might be tall, and that's through DNA. And so the DNA that had all those virus fossils in it, from this person, now is inside this person, their kid, and all their children inherit it. And so, yeah.
So would that mean that, like, whenever they get grown, they will have the same thing?
They won't necessarily have a virus infection, but they will have the piece of the virus that was left inside. Yes?
Plus, whenever they get infected, they'll have even more, right? They'll just be out.
Exactly. And so this person will be subjected to other viruses throughout their life and will probably accumulate even more. And that's a good point, because this allows us to have kind of a timeline of infection. Meaning, if this person has a certain fossil that their father doesn't, then we know that it happened during this person's lifetime. And so it serves as a great way to keep track of when things happen. Did you have a question?
If they have babies with they have little pieces too?
So that's a good question. And so I've also illustrated here, these people, it's kind of hard to see, But these people also go on to have kids. I've illustrated each of them having 3. And all those kids are going to have these virus fossils inside of them. And so I've illustrated just 3 generations here.
So it just keeps going on and on.
Yeah, and so your DNA is preserved. It gets passed on continuously throughout your life. And so what this says is that a virus infection that might have happened to this guy, in this case it's like the grandfather, is you can still see it in the DNA in these kids. And so what we're learning is that this information has been passed on for millions of years. And scientists are starting to find ancient viruses inside your DNA that date back millions of years. Not only that, but with new technology, we're able to bring back a little piece of it, or we bring back these ancient viruses, and we can test them against a lot of different things and learn about how they evolve. So it sounds kind of scary, scientists bringing back ancient viruses, but you have to keep in mind, those viruses went extinct for a reason. Humans are still here today, and they aren't. And so when we bring these viruses back to life, what we typically find is they're unable to infect humans. Somehow humans have evolved to counteract the viruses, and in doing so, those particular virus species go extinct. And even though they're extinct, like the dinosaurs, we can still see them inside of when we look at our DNA. And so that's what a virus fossil is, and I spend a lot of time looking for them. But really, in summary, virus fossils are deposited and preserved in your genetic information, or DNA. And this is why they can be inherited, and they have been inherited over millions of years. And what scientists are finding now is they seem to be in all organisms. And so, take HIV, for example. They have found ancient versions of HIV in all of these animals, in koalas, in pigs, in mice, in chimpanzees, gorillas, and baboons. And so it's clear that pretty much every organism on Earth seems to have to deal with these viruses. Not only that, but we've had to deal with them for millions of years, and they deposit themselves inside of us and allow us to go and look and see what they looked like and how they've changed over time, which will help to facilitate future vaccines. If we find patterns, as if there's some sort of pattern in how the viruses change, and we can predict that pattern, then future vaccines will actually be able to predict where the virus is going and target a virus that hasn't even arisen yet. So that's kind of the goal of my research, is to understand the patterns in virus evolution and also try to uncover as many of these virus fossils that I can in order to learn something about how they have evolved with humans over long spans of time. Okay, so I'm going to kind of summarize everything I've said, and then I'm going to show you guys some pictures that I've taken of cells in my lab that I work with, and I'll also show you some pictures of me at work. So virus fossils allow us to see how virus challenges have been overcome in the past. It allows us to see the origin of viruses that are significant health threats today, like HIV. We've been able to understand that HIV, an ancestor of it, might have arisen many millions of years ago. And we want to understand why. How is it that these very productive viruses just pop out of nowhere? No one knows how that happens, and so we're trying to understand that. The other thing is how viruses emerge, similar to, like you said, with Ebola, how viruses emerge into human populations from wild animals. These are known as cross-species transmissions, and it's very important to understand why they happen and where they're going to happen next. And so there's a lot of people that are doing something called viral forecasting, which is where we try and predict where the next pandemic is going to emerge. Okay. Are there any questions so far? Yes.
So like you said about like the virus getting to people, so that like some people born with cancer.
So virus infections can lead to cancer sometimes, and if are people born with cancer, I don't think we know that yet. Certainly there may be viruses that get inherited that can still be active maybe, and they can go on to cause cancer. I would say it's possible, but we don't actually know that yet.
So the cancer can get passed on if you have it? this person to the hospital?
Typically, when someone is getting cancer, that's something that arises during their lifetime. Meaning they get mutations somewhere in their genome that leads to the cancer. But typically, those things don't get passed along because it has to happen in what are called your germ cells. And so cancer typically is not inherited for that reason, but that doesn't mean that it can't be. Good question. Yeah.
So the nucleus represents the ground whenever we like dig up fossils of dinosaurs and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our DNA collectively, which is called our genome, you can basically think of as like the dirt, and we're digging through the genome trying to find these virus fossils. Good question. Okay, so I'm going to show you guys quickly. I know I'm kind of going over. Here's a picture of me at work. You can see that I'm wearing a lab coat because we do deal with viruses and human cells and things like this. And I'm also wearing gloves, of course, because we deal with a lot of DNA. And so you can imagine, we're humans, we have DNA. And so if we're moving around, touching everything with our bare hands, we're going to contaminate all of our samples with our own DNA. So gloves are a very important aspect of molecular biology. And of course, in this experiment, I'm wearing a mask because I'm dealing with flu. And so in my lab, to study the evolution of flu, we actually will take human cells, or human tissue that we can grow, and infect it with flu virus. And so that's what I'm doing in this case. So this is me all suited up. Here's a picture of a microscope that we use, and I have here like a little, you can hardly see it, but it's a flask, and inside is growing human tissue that we can look at. And I'll show you guys a few pictures of that. But this is a pretty fancy microscope. I think this whole little rig costs something like $20,000. Luckily, I don't pay for that, my boss does. So here's some pictures of cells. Can we dim the lights? Whoops. Is that too loud?
Sorry. There we go.
Okay. Yeah, so here's some pictures of cells that I've taken in my lab. And what's cool about this, all the different colors are kind of different stains. I'm able to kind of look at just a particular part of the cell whenever I want to. And so, for example, up here in the red, all the red regions, this is all in like the cytoplasm that I was describing earlier. And the blue stuff down here is all the nucleus. And so if you look at a single row, or a single column, you can see this is all the same cell, just it's stained with different colors. So this stuff is in the cytoplasm, so is this, and then the nucleus, and then this is everything taken together. And so this is kind of one of the more pretty pictures that we take in biology. This is called, has a fancy name, it's called immunofluorescence, but it produces really pretty pictures like that. They're fun to look at. Okay, but when they're not being fluorescent cells, what they look like is this. And so I've shown, again, some of the cells that I use in my lab. These are human cells, feline or cat cells, canine or dog cells, and murine or mouse cells. So we have all these cells in the lab, and the reason we grow all of them, just infect them with virus. Again, we're trying to study how viruses emerge into new species. And so by having all these different species, we're able to infect them all and try to understand how that actually happens. Okay, and this is the last picture, but this is the minus 150-degree freezer where we keep all of our cells. They have to be very cold if you want to preserve them. And so you can see this is actually liquid nitrogen coming off all the flasks. And this is a picture of me opening it. So you can see how cold these samples are coming off all the flasks. And this is a picture of me opening it. So you can see how cold these samples are. But that's kind of some of the cool things that we deal with in our lab. So that's everything I wanted to show you all today. Thanks for your attention. If there's not any more questions, thanks again.
Thank you, everyone. If you
Fill out the
fill out the little forms if you haven't already. That'd be great. Give us some feedback.